Okay. Well, everyone, welcome to the kickoff event for the Spring Law mini-series. This presentation is called Roadmap for Fall Law School Applications. And for anyone that I haven't met before, my name is Nicole Park. I work in career education as an industry advisor, and I cover the areas of law, government, and public policy. So there's a lot that we could talk about with regard to exploring a career in law. But this particular presentation is really focused on people who know that they are applying to law school in the fall and how to get ready for that application process right now, beginning in the spring semester. So it's fine if you're here and you are not planning to apply to law school in the fall, but it will be a pretty dense presentation. So don't worry if some of it feels overwhelming to you if you are not applying to law school right away. You have time, and you can take some time to digest this information and come to me with any questions. So all are welcome, but it's going to be quite densely focused on fall law school applications. I do include a lot of links, QR codes. I will send you the slides afterwards in case you're not catching them as they come up. So just shoot me an email if you don't get the slides or if you have specific questions. Okay, so a quick overview of what your timeline looks like for applying to law school. And if we start with this goal at the top, since you're planning ahead, optimally, your goal would be to submit applications between September and December of 2023 if you'd like to be sitting in a law school classroom in September of 2024. Law school admissions is rolling. Many of you may already know that. So applications mostly open September 1st. And usually deadlines are February or March, depending on the school. But ideally, you want to be submitting your applications in that September, October, November timeframe rather than the December, January, February timeframe. The reason for that is because of rolling admissions, you're going to set yourself up for the best chance of success with regard to both admissions as well as scholarship money, because the pool of scholarship money, which is mostly at this point merit-based aid, is bigger at the beginning of the cycle than it is at the end of the cycle when much of it has already been earmarked for other applicants. So if we assume that you're planning ahead and that's your goal, and I put down here later is okay too, because every year I work with many applicants who apply in December, January, February and end up going to law school. So I don't want you to think, this is the only way to do it. It's just, this is what we aim for. So if that's your goal, then starting at the bottom, here's an overview of what you're looking at. What you'd want to be thinking of soon, so I put ASAP, is thinking about your test prep plan. Doesn't mean you need to necessarily be signed up for an LSAT or a GRE yet, but be thinking about that plan. And then applying for a fee waiver if you believe you might be eligible for a fee waiver, and or testing accommodations if you think you're eligible for testing accommodations. Those are things that you want to be the very first things you're thinking about because they do require some lead time. And then in April, June, August, or September, that's when you're probably looking to take your first LSAT. And that's something that I would recommend we talk about on like an individual basis and one-on-one meetings, because that will differ depending on what you've got going on this spring and summer and when you can prepare. But the great thing about taking your first test, let's say in June, is that then you can, if necessary, test again in August or September while still giving yourself time in the fall to do things like drafting your personal statement, pulling together your recommendations with testing behind you. So you don't have to have it all coinciding at the same time. May and June are a really nice time to talk to your recommenders if they're professors, because that way they have the summer to really spend time thinking about your recommendations and fitting in the writing into their schedules. September and October, not such an ideal time, because if they're professors, they're in the middle of teaching their classes and maybe midterms. So I encourage you to think ahead for asking for recommendations. During the summer, a great thing that you can get taken care of is to register for an LSAC account and for the Credential Assembly Service and have your transcripts sent to LSAC. That's something you can just get taken care of, get out of the way. Yes, you will have to update your transcripts later in the year if you are a current student, but it's still good to just get one on file, because it does take about 2 weeks to process. So you don't want to be worrying about that when you're worrying about a lot of other things. So then the next step is very broad: summer, fall, winter, depending on everything else going on in your life. That's when you're going to be starting to think about drafting your personal statements, diversity statement, optional essays, addenda, which we'll talk more about, your resume. So that's all stuff that you can spread out over summer, fall, and winter, depending on your timeline. You're probably not going to narrow down your list of law schools until like August, September at the earliest. I know that's something that often people lead with, is like, oh, I know I want to go to one of these schools. And sure, it's great to have a few that you're focusing on, but narrowing down your entire list is probably not something you're going to be able to do until you have your LSAT score, know your current GPA, have hopefully had some conversations with some current students, maybe visited a law school class, done a little more research. So I recommend that people really have that final list not until later in the process. September is when applications open. We mentioned that. So one thing to know about when applications open, you may think that you're going to be totally ready, have everything ready to go. I'll have my personal statement drafted, I'll have my resume, everything will be all set. But you do have to allow time for simply like filling out the application itself. There will be demographic information. There will be short answers that you need to complete. They will ask you in some cases to kind of like reiterate some of what's on your resume. So allow time for that. Even if you think you're really prepared, it all does take a little more time than you think. So just planning ahead, setting aside time for all of that. And then this last bit, October, November, later, that's when you might retake the LSAT if you feel that that's necessary. And another thing to add on to your list for kind of the future after you've submitted your applications is researching outside scholarships, because there are external scholarships you may want to apply for that can make a big difference. Because if you're getting some aid from your school and then you can get another like $2,000 here or $500 here, that's all money that you don't have to pay back. So every little bit is great. Okay, so I mentioned briefly applying for fee waivers is one of the first things that you need to think about. So that's why I have this here as the earliest deadline. If you think that you may be eligible for a fee waiver or you want to look into it, I recommend doing that as soon as possible. So the first thing is check your eligibility. There are some citizenship / residency requirements that you'll want to take a close look at. And here's the thing that you have to know. If you're applying for a fee waiver, it has to happen 6 weeks before the registration deadline for the LSAT that you're planning to take. And so the example I'm including here, because I think some of you might be on this timeline, is the June LSAT. The registration deadline will be April 25th. So counting backwards from April 25th, that puts you at mid-March. So that's coming up a lot sooner than you might think. So just have that on your radar, look into it. If you think you may be eligible for a fee waiver, these are all the things that the fee waiver gives you. They do have 2 tiers. So maybe you may not be eligible for the one that gives you the most, but even if you're eligible for the lower tier, you still get a lot from it. And part of what you get is some test prep resources. So that's another good reason to be thinking about this early, because if you apply early and you get the test prep resources and you get score preview, it's all very, very helpful. And each one of these things costs additional money. So it's just a good thing to like give it a try if you think you're borderline. And the last note I have here is that law schools may waive their application fees just outright. Like if you're an LSAC fee waiver recipient, you may just automatically get application fees waived. So that's a good thing to know. Okay, so really quick rundown of LSAT dates. and some additional details. And this QR code will take you right to the page that has all the LSAT dates and registration deadlines listed. I want you to be aware that there are deadlines coming up. For the April LSAT, it's March 2nd. And then, like we said, for the June LSAT, it's in April. These other ones have not officially been announced yet, but it's always about 6 weeks in advance. So if you have in mind like a plan to take the LSAT in August or something, just mark your calendar, because they have sometimes had applicants like plan on taking an LSAT, but not really be aware of the registration deadline. So you just want to make sure that you don't miss that. One thing to note, these stars at the bottom, the registration deadline for the LSAT is also the last day to request disability related accommodations. So if you typically receive accommodations, or if you think you're going to be requesting them, be aware of that, and do your research on what paperwork you may need, and ask some questions in advance of the deadline. Score preview is a thing that you may have heard about. So I just put this here as something to consider. If you're not receiving a fee waiver, it is something you need to pay for, but it can give, for a lot of people, it gives them peace of mind, because what happens is it allows you to see your LSAT score, and then within 6 days, you get to decide if you want to cancel it or keep it. It still shows up as a C for cancel on your record. Law schools will see that. But I think for some people, especially if they're taking the test for the first time, having that peace of mind can calm their nerves. So it's something to know about. And then you may have heard about the LSAT writing, which is another piece of the test. And you choose when you take it. Some people, it's open before the LSAT. So some people take it before, some people take it after. You take it on your own time, but you can't get your score until you've taken it. So just know that that exists, but don't worry too much about it. I've never really heard law schools put like a very heavy emphasis on it. And at Wellesley, you have very excellent training and research and writing, and I haven't really heard people have an issue with it. So just something to know about. I wanted to talk about LSAT prep. We are going to also talk about this in the alum panel that will be coming up as part of this series on Friday. I asked those alums to please share with us all the ups and downs of their LSAT prep. But I know I hear this this question a lot from applicants. And so I wanted to give you my quick take on it. The conventional wisdom for LSAT prep is to spend about 200 to 300 hours on it over time. For some people, that's over about 3 months. For other people, if they're working and they have to squeeze it in here and there, it has to be spaced out longer. You'll ideally begin by taking a timed practice exam. That'll be your diagnostic test and will help you understand what is coming easily to you, what is more challenging to you, and it will help you kind of understand where to focus your preparation. There's a whole range of options for test prep, and it's very individual. I talk to people every day who are doing things differently, but still finding success. So you can always begin with the free resources on LSAC's Law Hub. So they have partnered with Khan Academy, and they have free resources. The next kind of low-cost option that LSAC offers is a $99 option where it gives you access to a whole bunch of practice tests. We also have books in career ed that we lend out. A lot of people find success with books, especially PowerScore. I hear very good things about the PowerScore books. So if you're someone who does a good job with self-studying, you might want to think about buying or borrowing books and taking that option. There are some good online subscription services that are pretty flexible. You only have to subscribe like month to month. So if you feel like you're doing well in 1 or 2 sections, but there's like one that's giving you a hard time, maybe you might do this like online subscription service for a couple months, like just enough to give you what you need in the section that's giving you trouble. But that way you don't have to subscribe, or you don't have to sign up for a whole like full length curriculum course that's going to cover like each section equally, which for some people I know feels like a little bit of a waste of time if they want to hone in on certain sections. So ones that I hear good things about are Seven Sage and LSAT Demon, and both of them have options to do a free trial. So you can see what you think, and they have different levels of subscription. So you can take a look at that. And then the last thing here is there are a lot of advice threads on the Facebook group, Wellesley Lawyers Network. So I don't know if any of you participate in that group, but if you don't, it's something to check out because it is a huge group of alums who are lawyers, as well as aspiring lawyers, and they're very welcoming of students and alums who are aspiring lawyers. So you can always join that and then run a search for LSAT and see what comes up. So I touched on this a little bit, but Career Ed does have resources for test prep, and here they are. So the first thing that I mentioned was that we have test prep books available to lend. We lend them out for 4 months. Right now for the LSAT, I have the PowerScore Trilogy, I have Mike Kim's LSAT Trainer, and then I have 2 GRE books as well. And we'll talk about the GRE as an option. We are launching mini grants for grad school preparation. You'll get communication about those soon, and this QR code will take you to the website. They're $100. They're for whatever grad school prep you need, and the deadline will be coming up in mid-March. And then lastly, we have a Princeton Review discount that works out to about 40% off. So hopefully some of those will be helpful for you. Okay, so what about the GRE? The GRE is an option for law school testing for about 100 schools now, and that includes almost all of the top 20 schools. It's always a big question. When would you choose the GRE over the LSAT? Is there a disadvantage to choosing the GRE over the LSAT? I would say all else being equal, like if you haven't started any test prep and you have no reason to think you'd be better or worse at one test, like all else being equal, I would begin with the LSAT. That is the test that law schools are more used to seeing. We have a wealth of statistics on LSAT medians, so that can help you predict where you'd be likely to get in based on your LSAT score and GPA. And there are far fewer statistics on the GRE because it's a more recent development that law schools are accepting the GRE. So all else being equal, and if you feel like, equally comfortable with either exam, I'd sign up for the LSAT and see how, or I'd at least start prepping for the LSAT and see how your prep is going. But all is not always equal. There can be reasons that you might choose the GRE over the LSAT. The main reasons that I see are people who maybe have already gone to a graduate program. So an alum who's already gone to a graduate program for which they had to take the GRE. And there's just no reason for them to spend money preparing for and taking another exam if they already have a strong GRE score and the schools that they're applying to accept the GRE. That just wouldn't be a great use of their time. Sometimes people don't have an existing graduate degree, but they're planning to apply to multiple graduate programs. So they're not 100% certain about law school. So they're applying to law school as well as master's programs. Sometimes they may be applying to joint programs. In that case, if you're applying to programs that require the GRE and you're applying to law schools that take either or, it makes a lot more sense to focus your time and energy on the GRE so you can just do really well on one test instead of having to try to do well on 2 tests. So I think that's everything on the GRE. Feel free to ask me questions at the end. This QR code takes you to the list of law schools that accept the GRE. Okay, Credential Assembly Service. So this is something that you're going to be thinking about this summer, if you remember that sort of timeline overview that I showed you. So what is CAS? For anyone who hasn't heard about it before, this is the Law School Admission Council's centralized service for law school applications. So it's going to be the place that you go for all of your applications eventually. It's going to be where you have your transcripts summarized, where you have your recommendations sent. They're going to do all of the electronic processing of your applications. It's sort of the central place where everything will live. So, and the orange here shows that exactly what it includes. So you'll see it includes the creation of a law school report. That's your CAS report. You're going to hear me referring to that. So you want to register and pay for CAS at least 4 to 6 weeks before your first application deadline. So that's why I say, like, just get it taken care of this summer. That way you don't have any like last minute scramble for it. Without the fee waiver, it does cost $195. So I know that that can sometimes be a concern for people. Like, what if I register now and I pay all that money and then I end up deciding not to apply to law school right away? Well, it is good for 5 years. So that's a helpful thing to know. It remains active. And that also means that if you have recommendations sent to LSAC, they'll just stay banked in your account for those 5 years. So you'll have them. You can just hold on to them, even if you ended up deciding not to apply right away. So transcripts. This can be a little bit complicated because I know many of you take classes not only at Wellesley, but maybe you've studied abroad, maybe you've taken classes at MIT or Babson or Olin, maybe you've taken community college classes before coming to Wellesley or during the summers. So it is important to really read the rules carefully on exactly what transcripts need to be sent to LSAC. Again, you don't want to be scrambling at the last minute to have transcripts sent that you didn't know had to be sent. So this QR code takes you to the rules, LSAC rules. Even if you read them really carefully, it can still be confusing. So if you have any sort of like outlier situations and you read through the rules, feel free to come to me with questions. We can reach out to my contact at LSAC if it's really unclear. So I just want you to know you're not alone in trying to figure this out. But there are some rules that apply to a lot of you that we'll go through. So first, and I think most importantly, for MIT, you don't need a separate transcript. MIT and Wellesley have what LSAC calls an interinstitutional relationship. So that means your grades from MIT appear on your Wellesley transcript, LSAC will take them and there's no issue there. So that's an easy one. You don't need an MIT transcript. You would need a transcript from Babson or Olin or most other places that you might have taken classes. For study abroad, it's a little tricky, but the rule is if you have studied abroad for 1 full academic year or less, you are not required to send that transcript to LSAC. So that usually applies to most people at Wellesley. Usually the most you would have done is 1 full academic year, but it's only if you've done more than 1 full academic year that you're required to send that transcript to LSAC. That said, even though LSAC doesn't require international transcripts, if you've studied abroad for less than a year, some law schools might ask for them. So you do need to keep your eyes open for specific law school requirements. And then the transcript, your Wellesley transcript gets ordered through Parchment. I just took a little screenshot of what the website looks like here. If you have any trouble with it, just let me know. So what does LSAC do with your Wellesley grades? Because they're a little bit unique, right? With the shadow grading. And then if you happen to be at Wellesley during spring 2020, you've got some mandatory credit nons on there. So what happens? What happens with all of this? Well, I think the biggest concern that people often have is if I have credit non, and we know LSAC is converting all of my grades, do they convert credit to a score to like a GPA that is not beneficial to me? And will that bring down my GPA? The answer is no. It's not going to have any negative impact on your LSAC cumulative GPA. And the reason is because it falls, the credit non and the shadow grades, they fall under this unconverted category. So the credits show up, you get the credits, but the grades do not get converted to LSAC's the way they weight things. So, and then law schools, they're used to seeing like 60 plus Wellesley applicants every year. So they're used to seeing this. So you don't have to have any concern about like the law schools being perplexed by shadow grading. Same with if you were in school during spring 2020 with mandatory credit non, like they've seen so many of those types of transcripts that it's not going to be an issue. So what LSAC does when they summarize your transcript and put it into your CAS report is they kind of like slice and dice your GPA in a bunch of different ways. So they're going to provide the law schools in this report with the cumulative GPA for all of the schools that you've attended altogether. They're going to give a cumulative GPA for each school you've attended. So if you did attend like one community college class, you're going to get a cumulative GPA for that institution. Your Wellesley GPA, cumulative GPA, will be your degree granting institution GPA. So that's the one they'll mostly look at. But I think what's most reassuring and what a lot of people don't realize is LSAC also gives the law schools, as part of this report, information about general grading patterns from your undergraduate school. So they take the data from all law school applicants from your institution over the last 3 years to calculate a college mean GPA. So I think that's really reassuring because, that college mean GPA is going to look a lot different at a big state school or a school where we know they have grade inflation than it is at a school like Wellesley, where we know we have grade deflation. So it puts everything into context, and the law schools do take that into account, and they do consider what your GPA from Wellesley means. So just, think about that if you start to feel nervous about grade deflation at Wellesley. Okay, oh boy, this is a dense one. Okay. So we're going to move on to letters of recommendation and who you might ask, how you might ask them, and when you should ask them. So for most law schools, they're going to require 2 letters of recommendation and offer more optional letters of recommendation. But you do, I know I said don't decide on your final list of schools until August or September, but you are going to want to poke around a little bit for the schools that you think you're going to apply to and check each school's requirements. Because if you happen to be applying to a school that has a very rigid requirement for 2 academic professors to write recommendations, then you know that no matter what, even if not all of your schools require that, you still have to get 2. So it's important to know that so that you can kind of be thinking along the lines now of, okay, I should be solidifying relationships with these professors during the course of the spring semester because I'm anticipating, being able to ask these 2 professors for recommendations in the summer. So most often it's at least 1 professor, sometimes 2. Sometimes you might use a work or internship supervisor or coach, maybe someone who supervised you during volunteer work. So they can come from different parts of your life, but always at least 1 professor. Do think about who knows you the best. That really is the number 1 consideration, much more so than whether they're in your major department or whether they're a big name professor who someone would know, or whether they're an alum of the law school. All of those things are of very little importance compared to who knows you really well, knows who you are as an individual, knows what you bring into the classroom community, what perspective you offer. If it's a professor, hopefully they know your writing. Hopefully they know a little bit about how your writing has progressed over the time that they've known you, and maybe how you accept feedback. Those are all really valuable things for them to be able to speak to. So this is especially true for professors. If you can make your request by the end of the spring semester, they will appreciate that very much, because that gives them the whole summer to think about how they're going to fit in, their letter of recommendation drafting. If you can't, if you don't decide who you're going to ask until mid or to late summer, you do your best. But this is what you're aiming for, to ask them while you're still on campus in the spring. And then to smooth the process along, I would say always expressing your gratitude for the time they're taking to do this, and then offering to help by providing supporting material like your personal statement or your resume, talking to them about your specific career goals if that's not something that you have talked to them about in the past, and maybe even offering some ideas like, If it is someone who's seen a great improvement in your writing, you can tell them, I'm really hoping that you would write about how much my writing has improved with your feedback, because I think that would be really valuable for the law schools to see. That's okay to give them guidance like that. Recommendation writers usually really appreciate that. So one of the next things on that timeline as we got closer to the fall and into the fall was personal statement. And I'm sure that you have heard all sorts of good and bad things about writing a law school personal statement, because it's a little weird. They don't really give you much guidance. There's not much of a prompt. Some schools have a little bit of a prompt, but most have almost nothing. So you know that you're aiming for about 2 pages double spaced, and that's kind of all you know. And that's intentional, because they do want to see where you take it, where you go with it. But I know it can be very intimidating, even if it is intentional. Keep in mind that there's a reason they call it a personal statement. They do want to get to know you as a person. They want you to use the opportunity in this 2 pages to tell them something they wouldn't otherwise know about you. So it's not the place to just walk through your resume and tell them how like each internship developed your interest in wanting to go to law school. They can glean that from your resume. They don't need you to walk through it. But it is a great place to tell them a story that they might otherwise never know about you. And so one thing I want to mention here, I don't think I say it anywhere else in this presentation, is you do, through your law school application, need to somewhere answer the question, why law school? But you don't have to answer it in your personal statement. So if you're thinking about your law school application as a whole, and it has so many different components, you may get across why you're applying to law school in other places. It may come across through sort of the thread of your resume. It may come across even in your transcript. May come across through letters of recommendation. If you have a work supervisor or a professor who is really closely familiar with your career goals, maybe they're going to take care of talking about that. So do think about your application as a whole, and know that if why law school is coming across really clearly somewhere else in your application, that gives you the freedom to maybe talk about something different in your personal statement. Also consider how it fits together with a possible diversity statement if you're thinking about writing one, because you don't ever want to repeat things. So if you know that you're going to be talking about resilience or your community or something like that in your diversity statement, that frees you up to not have to talk about that in your personal statement and be able to use the space for something else. And then the last point here, I think, is the most important, which is really never too early to start jotting things down. When you think about like the personal statement as this 2-page package that you need to have, in like a perfect little package, it puts a lot of pressure on you. But if you start early with just like jotting down ideas, or maybe like writing a little paragraph that's sort of like the seed of some of your interest in law, just like writing things down with no agenda and no pressure, that is going to serve you really well in the future, because then you won't be staring at that blank page, like wondering how the heck you're going to get these 2 pages written in time to submit in October. So just something to keep in mind. Open a Google Doc, journal if you journal, but just jot a few things down so you don't have that blank page staring at you. I'm going to pause for a minute here and just let you look at this like very wide range of examples. And this I pulled from, I think, 2021 maybe. So I now have a whole other bank of like very different personal statement examples. So, but this just gives you a little sense of the wide range of things you might talk about. So I mentioned a few times that there are optional essays, And a question that I always get is, are they really optional? And they really are. They're really optional. Law schools don't pull any punches. If they want you to do something, they're going to tell you. They're definitely not shy about making things required. So yes, they are really optional. If you don't have anything to say, don't try to make stuff up. That's not going to do you any favors, but they can be a really good opportunity to share more if you do have something to say. So most often optional essays take the form of a diversity statement or an addendum. An addendum often addresses things like if you took the LSAT many times, if your scores sort of jumped up and down in unexpected ways, or if you feel like your test scores are really not in line with your academic ability, you might write an addendum about that. Sometimes people write a GPA addendum for different reasons. It could be one tough semester that you had, and then there's a reason for that, but there's no way of knowing that without you explaining it. Honor code violations that would require an addendum, and I'm always happy to help with those if you have questions about any disciplinary things and whether or not to disclose. Another optional essay that many schools offer is why this school. And then there's a bunch of so-called fun ones. Yale has one that's the Yale 250. It's 250 words about whatever you want. They give you the idea that it could be a time that you've changed your mind or something that is an academic or professional interest, and you have to write a nice, neat, and tidy little 250 words about it. Georgetown has a top 10 list, no other instructions, just top 10 list. So yeah, so those are all very much optional, but if inspiration strikes, then I would definitely encourage you to write them. Oh, actually, Yale 250 is required, but the other ones are optional. So if you are inspired, share that with the law schools, because the more you can give them that shows who you are, the more that will help. Resume, this is a pretty straightforward one. The main thing to know about it is where you might tailor your resume for job applications or internship applications. You might tailor it very specifically to an internship or to a job. For law school, you want it to be more comprehensive. It doesn't have to be limited to 2 pages for most law schools. There are exceptions, but for most law schools, it can be 2 pages. It can be like a much more complete view of everything you've done throughout college and in the community. Do check for specific instructions though, because there are some schools that want very specific formatting. They want to know details like if a experience was paid or unpaid and the number of hours per week. And do be very vigilant about mistakes, because these are mostly lawyers, former lawyers, who are going to be reading it, and they are going to be nitpickier than your average resume reader. And I am always here to nitpick with you and proofread. So moving on to making your law school list. I like to begin, we're going to talk a lot about this, but I like to begin with this idea of just getting yourself organized, because it is very overwhelming. There are a lot of law schools, a lot of information out there about which ones are worth going to. We could have a whole philosophical conversation about that word, being worth it. But yeah, with different deadlines, with numbers that you're, have spinning in your brain, with advice from Reddit and who knows where else, it can be very overwhelming. So I do think it is very grounding for people to begin with either a spreadsheet or a note or on your phone, whatever you use to get organized. Give yourself a framework that as you learn information about schools, as you learn that maybe like one school requires 2 professor recommendations, or one school actually does have a personal statement prompt that's pretty specific, unlike what I told you about how most schools don't have specific personal statement prompts. You need to have a space where you can write all that stuff down so it's not swimming around in your brain stressing you out. So this is just a quick example of what I would do for a spreadsheet, but I'm sure you all are much more capable than me on Google Sheets. So then once you have some sort of a framework that you feel like is going to keep you grounded and organized, where do you start? And so, for some people, they might start with location, and we'll get to that. But another good place to start is numbers. And I hate to say that because it's really not, this whole process is really not all about your LSAT and GPA. And you're going to hear that a lot from me if we work together on your law school applications. I've just seen way too many cases of people getting into law schools where their numbers would not have indicated that they would get in. So it is really, truly is not all about your LSAT and GPA, but they do provide a very helpful starting point. Like if you're geographically flexible and you're flexible in other ways, then it's like, well, where do I even begin? And so this can provide a helpful starting point. What I'm showing here is a chart from the Seven Sage website. Seven Sage, like I mentioned before, is an LSAT prep company, but they also have like very helpful resources on their website. And one of them is this like filterable, sortable, downloadable chart that has like all the LSAT, GPA medians, and a bunch of other information. So what I showed here is just like how, like if I had a 167 on the LSAT and I just wanted to get a quick view of like what schools have 167 as their 50th percentile, I can sort the spreadsheet that way and then take a quick look at those schools and the schools that fall on either side of it, and then start to pick out like, okay, well, I'm willing to live in California and DC. I'm not so willing to live in Utah. You can start to like take a look. Another tool that I mentioned here is Explore JD. And I realize you can't click this link, but I will send you the slides afterwards. It's a little gimmicky because it's like a tool where you kind of enter things that you're looking for in a law school, but it's actually pretty great because you get to say things like, would you rather live in a walkable city, or do you have a car and are you okay driving around? Is diversity of the faculty important to you? Do you want to go to a school where, many of the students are receiving upwards of 50% tuition scholarship? All sorts of things that you can put in, and it'll just spit out a whole list of schools that you might consider. So take a look, play around with it. It could be interesting for you. So this is what I was mentioning with geographic region being important. Logistics do matter, even if you feel like you're pretty flexible when it comes to location. Do think about what environment you thrive most in, because law school will be challenging and it will push you in ways that you may not expect. And so thinking about where you have a support system, whether you like living in a city, whether you don't like living in a city, all of those things are worth considering. Looking ahead to where you hope to begin a legal career, you may not have the answer to that yet, but if you have a sense, a really quick and easy thing to do is to pull up a law school's official page on LinkedIn and then go to their alumni tab. That's what I've done here for BU. And this takes like 30 seconds and it's going to spit out this like very helpful bar graph of where these alums are located. So you can do that with any school and get a very quick sense of where alums are practicing law. And that will tell you very quickly whether a school has a national reach or is really like a much more like local or regional school. And then you have to kind of do some reflection on how much that matters to you. A few more considerations to keep in mind. These, I know sometimes people prioritize these. For me, like I wouldn't prioritize them, but I would just be, or at least the top one, I would just be thinking about it, but I wouldn't make it a priority. Thinking about specializations and whether a law school, if you're interested in, let's say, immigration law, for example, if you know that a law school has a clinic, an immigration law clinic, or an immigration law journal, if they have joint degree programs that are relevant to you. All of this you can find in one place if you look for the Book of Law School lists. It's a huge document. I don't even know how many, hundreds of pages. But if you just do a quick Control F when you open it up, so you would do a Control F for like environment or immigration or whatever your particular area of interest is. And you can start to get some information about what schools have concentrations or clinics in these specific areas. That can be helpful. I highly recommend the second point, which is doing rigorous comparisons of employment data. That's something I love to work with people on. So if you get to a point where you're kind of like narrowing down specific schools, I'm happy to help you run comparisons. On this next slide, I'll show you what that can look like. So there's a really great nonprofit called Access Lex that provides all sorts of information for people applying to law school and people currently in law school. They're mostly focused on helping people make smart financial decisions. But part of that is thinking about your return on investment. So they have this awesome tool called Analytics that I use all the time. So I'm very happy to walk you through it. It can be a little tricky at first, but you can run all sorts of side-by-side comparisons, any schools you want. On there, my favorite thing to look at is their employment stats. So this is just one quick example that you can run that I think is very illuminating. So I just put in the data point that I decided I wanted to measure was percentage of graduates employed in public interest law. And I just compared some Boston schools. And already, really quickly, you can see a huge difference between a school like Northeastern that's sending close to 20% of their grads into public interest law and a school like BC that's sending like low single digits into public interest law. So it's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean, like, I know the people who work in career services at BC, they have an amazing public interest advisor. So it's not the end all be all, but it does give you a sense of what your peers are most likely to be pursuing. And a little bit about the culture there, right? Like if you're one of only 2.6% of people who are going to land in public interest law after graduation, that might not be the prevailing culture at a school. So I think those are helpful things to think about. Okay, there's a lot to say on finances. And I think, happy to talk more about this as we meet individually, but I did want to give you a little bit of a sense of how finances work for law school. Most people are going to be financing their legal education through a combination of merit-based aid from your law school, unless you happen to be going to one of the minority of schools that offers need-based aid. So merit-based aid from your law school, that's stuff you don't have to pay back. Loans, which could be federal, they could be institutional, meaning they're coming through the law school, or they could be private loans, and external scholarships. When you're accepted to a law school, not always immediately, but either at the time you're accepted or at some point after, you will receive an award letter that will notify you of any institutional grants and scholarships. You are going to want to compare apples to apples when you get those award letters, hopefully from more than one school. Hopefully you'll have some options to look at. And so if you have questions as you're looking at these award letters, you can always contact the financial aid office. You can definitely ask me. I would also highly recommend reaching out to Access Lex. They do free one-on-one financial counseling, and they're amazing. Every person they have working for them is someone who has worked in financial aid in the past, and they have all sorts of great certifications, and they're amazing. So that's another resource too. You may have heard of something called reconsideration, which means if you get more aid from one school than you do from another, you can maybe go back to the school that gave you less aid and try to negotiate a little bit. They do not like it when you call it negotiation. They want you to call it reconsideration. Some schools have a process for that, so you do need to check their website to see if they have a process. Some schools do not, and you'll just have to email them. It's something to know that exists as an option. And feel free to ask me if you get into a situation where you're comparing aid and you have a school that you really want to go to, but they gave you less money. That's something that we can always talk about. Of course, that's way down the road, but it's good to know. Do know that there are some school-specific scholarships that you may want to apply for. So I listed a couple here. I mentioned the FAFSA. That can be completed anytime after October 1st. but it doesn't you don't have to do it at the same time you're doing your application. You can push it off later if you'd like. One thing about the FAFSA is it does ask for parental information. Here's the deal with that. For law school, you are considered independent. So for the purposes of government aid, they don't need your parental information. However, some law schools are going to ask for your parental information for their institutional aid. And so you will need to kind of draw that distinction between like, okay, I'm independent. I'm not required to provide this parental information for government aid, but law schools may require it. So you will have to look into what each law school is asking of you for that. And then here at the bottom is just another great resource through Access Lex. They have a whole database of external scholarships. So keep that in mind. Ideally, like after you've already applied to law school, because most of them don't have application deadlines until much later, but I want you to know that there are options for scholarships and for extra money that you could be looking at later in the process. Okay, my last big tip, my favorite, is use trusted sources of information, because there is a lot of bad information out there on the internet. A lot of people who have applied to law school and been through the process once, or maybe currently in the midst of the process, hold themselves out as experts when really they don't know what's going on in the admissions office. And there are people in admissions offices who are doing their best to make the process as transparent as possible. There are deans of admissions who are producing podcasts, who have YouTube channels, and they're really, really trying to make access to legal education more equitable by increasing transparency, and the information is there. So one podcast I really like is Navigating Law School Admissions with Miriam and Christy. They're the deans of admissions at Yale and Harvard. Even if you're not interested in Harvard and Yale, that's okay. Their advice is very universal. Same with Dean Sarah Zierfoss. She's the dean of admissions at UMichigan Law, and she has a whole YouTube channel. If you just Google UMichigan Law YouTube, you'll start to come up with those results. She goes through like actual applications and each component of them and tells you what she likes and doesn't like about them, right down to like use of passive voice and like the personal statement and like how someone formatted their resume. So it's awesome, really helpful. She's kind of funny too. The UVA Dean of Admissions, Natalie Blazer, she recently started an admissions podcast. I don't have a graphic for that on here, but it's called Admissible. So if you just look for UVA Law podcast, I'm sure it will come up. And then always look too at like the FAQs on a law school's website. They're a wealth of information. They answer like probably almost any question you can think of. So just know that even though the process seems a little bit opaque and intimidating, like there are people out there trying to make it more transparent, and try to make sure that you're going to those sources rather than to the people on Reddit who are telling you that they know everything. And my last thing, just a little reminder about the 2 upcoming events. On Friday, we have 4 really great alums who are going to talk to you about their admissions process and how they prepared for the LSAT too. They are currently at UNC, Fordham, Harvard, and which one am I missing? Georgetown. And they're awesome. And they have, some of them applied as seniors, some of them applied as alums. So good diversity of experience there. And then a full length practice LSAT on Saturday. Deadline to register for that is midnight tonight. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. Hopefully you all are still awake. And if you have any questions, we can open it up to questions.